previously. World leaders are in attendance along with 10 monarchs of different countries, along with 200,000 others to pay their respects to the late pontiff who died at 88 years old on Easter Monday. This will follow 9 days of mourning where an official mass will be held every single day in the Vatican during these 9 days. Vatican duties will only also be carried out if they are very much urgent. These next 9 days are going to be very much days of mourning, focusing on Pope Francis and his work he did during the days that he was alive. Known as the Novam Daliales, the 9 days of mourning. Sede vacante, which will be declared after these processions are over, which means the papal seat is vacant. The government of the church will be managed by the College of Cardinals once the service and the processions are over. Their authority is limited to essential administrative functions, while the Novem Daliales lasts. Then the preparations for the conclave will begin. The same College of Cardinals will convene to discuss the needs of the church and to plan the conclave. But today all focus is on Pope Francis, the Pope and the leader of the Catholic Church since 2013, as he's led, his wooden coffin is led towards his final resting place in St. Mary's Basilica. St. Peter's Basilica, my apologies. He will then be taken to St. Mary's Basilica. We are now following as the bell tolls for the rite of final commendation and farewell. This is marking the final moments for the funeral liturgy in St. Peter's Square, all moving into St. Peter's Basilica. The bell is tolled and the military band also played a brief honour as the coffin departed the square. Following this mass, the ceremony Following the Mass, the ceremony continued in the form of a funeral procession through the streets of Rome. We will continue to bring you more updates as this funeral continues. We are obviously covering the funeral of the late Pope Francis, the 88-year-old pontiff who passed away last week on Easter Monday. This happened after his battle with respiratory problems, briefly after making his final public appearance on Easter Sunday. 200,000 people in attendance. 50,000 in St. Peter's Square itself as they watch the wrap-up of the head of the Catholic Church's funeral procession. 12 years this ceremony marks the end of the Pope Francis's tenure as the head of the Catholic Church. Proceedings will now begin to select a new pope, a process called the conclave, but this will not commence until the 9 days of mourning, which will commence today, known as the Novem Daliales. During this time, masses are held every single day of these 9 days in this same place, St. Peter's Square, to pray for Pope Francis's soul. Today is the focus. Pope Francis is the focus for the day. World leaders gathering from every corner of the globe, including US President Donald Trump, Ukrainian President Zelensky, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, British monarchy Prince William, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, Argentinian President Javier Milei. The President of India is also in attendance. As you can see, the crowd is vast and silent. We are now joined by Joshua Barnes, anchor and correspondent for NewsX World. Joshua, what can you tell us about the current proceedings today as they wrap up?
Yes, absolutely, Thomas. Well, of course, we have just seen the service which has taken place at St. Peter's Square, starting in St. Peter's Basilica, where the coffin which contained Pope Francis was carried from where it lay in state for 3 days for members of the church and the public to pay their respects before it was shut and then carried out to St. Peter's Square. We heard sermons, we heard readings from the Bible. There were also moments for prayer as well until the end of the ceremony, which we have recently seen, and those moments of silence, almost 2 hours, in which the crowds, including cardinals, bishops, world leaders, delegates, members of the clergy and members of the public, were silent. Once the service was completed, the silence turned to cheers. We saw banners, we saw tears, but we also saw celebration of Pope Francis and his life, dedicating, of course, his life to the church. Some notable figures from the world. We have heads of state, we have prime ministers, presidents, princes, all in attendance at this service, which of course has brought everyone from across the world to the Vatican City. Of course, a very small country which sits inside of Rome in Italy. world leaders meeting, conversations happening, but this now in these moments is about the next journey, and it's Pope Francis's final journey as he makes his way from the Vatican and from St. Peter's Basilica to the Basilica of St. Mary, and that is where he will be buried. Some information on where he is going to be buried. Of course, it's not in the Vatican. It's been around a century since a pope has been buried outside of the Vatican walls, but it is a basilica that Pope Francis visited and prayed at quite a lot. So for him, it's important. Of course, he's being carried in a plain wooden coffin. Pope Francis, known for his humility, also known for his work and outreach with everyone across the world, Catholic and non-Catholic alike, rich, poor, any gender, any sexuality, something that he was strong on during his time and his papacy time, of course, as the head of the Roman Catholic Church. There are tens of thousands of people inside St. Peter's Square, hundreds of thousands in and around the Vatican. Up to 250,000 Vatican sources have said, though the police say this number is slightly lower. It's estimated around 200,000, but of course the journey will be adorned by many people lining the streets as the Pope makes his final journey. Of course, an extreme moment of sadness, but one of remembrance and celebration as well. You've mentioned already this process now will move towards a conclave and the next Pope being instated, but of course a period of mourning, 9 days of mourning, set to take place following the burial of Pope Francis. I'm sure many in St. Peter's Square in the sunshine were conflicted. Celebration, but of course condolences as well.
Yes, Joshua, 250,000 mourners in the Vatican City to witness the funeral, including 50,000 in St. Peter's Square itself. Two of those significant figures being Donald Trump, the American president, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. We have had some breaking news of a secondary meeting between the two world leaders. Obviously, this is a time where many people have come to pay their respects to the Pope, but there will be some diplomatic movements coming out of this event as well. What can you tell us about them?
Well, yes, absolutely. Before the service took place, there was a meeting in St. Peter's Basilica itself between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. The images that have been released following this meeting are certainly a surprise. Of course, this meeting taking place as we knew that it would before the service, but of course in the Basilica itself, St. Peter's Basilica. Shocking isn't the right word, but I think surprising, given the fact you've got both sides. You've got two nations at war with Russia and Ukraine, the United States, who have been playing their part under Donald Trump, trying to end this war. Of course, discussions yesterday between Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff and Vladimir Putin taking place in Russia. This an opportunity for Donald Trump and Zelensky to meet in person, and this follows their fractious meeting at the White House, in which a minerals deal was scheduled to be signed that would hand over critical mineral resources to the United States in the hope, in Ukraine's view, that there would be further military aid and support in the ongoing war with Russia. Now, Trump has spoken openly about his hope for a peace deal, saying that it is very close. And this conversation obviously will lead on from that one between Witkoff and Putin yesterday. We do know that a second meeting is going to take place between the leaders of Ukraine and the United States. I'm sure ceasefire negotiations are going to be a part of that conversation. Trump's rhetoric hasn't repeated that of Volodymyr Zelensky's. He's remained staunch in the fact that he cannot see any progress in these discussions if Crimea remains with Ukraine, something Trump has spoken about and said that Crimea, which was occupied by Russia in 2014, should remain with Russia. Zelensky, a staunch opponent to this idea. Many in Ukraine also staunch opponents to that idea of conceding land, which before fighting started with Russia was Ukrainian land.
Yes.
Now, some key figures in Ukraine have mentioned this topic. Of course, Vitaly Klitschko, the mayor of Kyiv, has spoken about it as well. So I expect that to be the topic of conversation in this second meeting taking place in the Vatican later.
Yes, Joshua, thank you very much for joining us. We will now take a short break now.